Good day to you, dear one. Welcome to this vlog. And of course, we will continue our series called God's Plan with Mankind. And we will turn to the slides. Always a pleasure. Remember that. Always a pleasure, God's Word. So, this was the last slide, if I am correct. And we've seen about the background of Abraham. We've seen about Noah, what happened. And just we are pondering about all these things. And we're talking about at least the fact that mankind is so depraved. Without God, mankind is totally hopeless. That's the point. So this was about the deluge, the flood, destroyed all, except Noah's family, obviously. However, we know just before the flood that the wickedness of man was great, and the thought of their hearts so evil that everything they thought was evil continuously. So that is like we cannot imagine that. But in the end times, it will be like that again. People will be very wicked, especially the second half of the last week of Daniel. Not because the human race, deserved a second chance, no, but rather because God's plan relatively still needed humans as the means of transportation for his son to offer his life for the world. Noah and his sons were preserved to carry on the race. So no, you could say far from humanity even in the neighborhood of being worthy of a second opportunity, the deluge was God's assessment upon that very humanity. Here, God clearly showed that all man's efforts resulted only in uselessness and devastation. In fact, humanity was so evil that Noah's warnings had no effect at all. Noah was a heralder of righteousness amid an iniquitous world, and that was a fact. Please remember then that in their acts, mankind was not an inkling better than the celestials among whom evil and sin started. Not one inkling. Same issues. Let's put it very politely. God offered mankind a fresh start with Noah in this eon, repeating to him the rules he had given first to Adam. See Genesis 1 verse 28a and Genesis 9 verse 1. But it soon became clear that immorality was rampant once more very soon in this eon. God dispersed humanity and mixed their tongues, or disintegrating their lip, to restrain them at the Tower of Babel or Babel. Still, things got worse. By the time we arrived at Terah and Abram, his son, humanity was essentially as horrible once more as it has been, or as it had been during Noah's lifetime. This is demonstrated by the fact that only Lot and his two daughters were preserved when God decided to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah due to their immorality, despite Abraham's vow that the city would be spared should as few as 10 righteous persons could be located within it. But what was the answer? Nope. Not even 10 people were righteous in Sodom and Gomorrah. Not even 10. So Lot, though, think about it, he converted no one, just as Noah converted no one in his time. We observe humanity gravitating to idolatry and wickedness time and again, once God withdraws his restraining influence. Every time, back again, back and forth. God needs to keep chiding Israel, his people, the descendants of Abraham, who also goes back many times to the idolatry of their ancestors. Yes, neither better are the Gentile countries. Same problems. In all this, we discover history repeating itself all the time. The injustice of the Amalekites, the wickedness of Nineveh, the unbelief and perversity of the generation living at the time of the Lord's first coming. How about that? The evil and violence of the end time of this eon, of which we now see the preparations, and which is likened to the days of Noah at that time. And the rebellion which will break out again among humanity even at the end of the millennium, when the adversary is loosed for a little season and the restraints of the righteous reign of Christ are withdrawn. All these are evidences of the inherent unrighteousness of humanity, which makes it impossible for anything in the flesh to please God, because that's the message behind it. Excuse me. Okay. Let's continue. The inherent evil tendencies of mankind cannot be changed by even Christ's first rule. Again, the inherent evil tendencies of mankind cannot be changed by even Christ's first rule in the millennium. They only help to repress them, those tendencies, those evil tendencies. Think about that. Only with a fresh creation they can be changed. The new earth, and of course the new heavens in that sense. And therefore we are implying that when Abram was summoned, none were righteous. None, not even Abram. No one was righteous at that time. Again, like everyone else, he was just as the others. But God revealed himself to him in Ur of the Chaldees and gave him orders to leave his house and travel into a country God would show him. And Abram, an idolater at that time, remember, followed the voice of the one actual and living God among all the small g gods. Such is the superiority of God's might above that of the gods Abraham and his friends revered. Abram would thus only honor the God that chose to be known as his friend who condescends, because God condescended at the level of Abram in that sense, as a friend. So at the age of 75 years, Abram is found in Genesis 12 traveling to Canaan with his wife Sarai and nephew Lot. Still, he didn't find things instantly simple. Oh no. First, there were some issues. First, there was the resistance of the native people of Canaan, since we know the Canaanite was still living on the territory, and also they were very pagan. Genesis 12 verse 6. Second, there was a famine in the country. Genesis 12 verse 10. And this was so terrible as to drive Abram to travel to Egypt in search of relief. How about that? Apparently, he didn't understand that the hunger was among everything that God had given him when he acquired the territory. Abram should have trusted God to supply and stayed where he was. But Abram depended on his own judgment at that time. God had not yet showed himself to him as the all-sufficient one. That was the difference at that time. This is the earliest reference to Egypt found in scriptures. And what a fascinating episode this turned out to be. Abram, through trusting in himself, got into difficulties and needed the intervention of God to extricate him. Apart from that, it was probably during his sojourn in Egypt that Sarai, his wife, obtained the services of Hagar, her Egyptian maid. Probably, or possibly even. Hagar, who was to become the mother of Ishmael, and indeed the mother of all the Arab people, Arabian people. Because Ishmael is the patron, you could say, the forefather of all the Arabian people. And the results appear to be having great consequences during this entire third eon. And we know, right? And especially in the end times, that will play a huge role again. Yes, interesting. Thirdly, there was also trouble inside his own, Abraham's own family. The disjointing with Lot that resulted in ongoing conflict between their respective herdsmen. Therefore, Abram decided it would be best to keep them apart. After this, Lot was taken prisoner during a sort of tribal conflict raging in that territory, and Abram and his allies went in force to deliver them, and that also succeeded. Fourthly, Abram doubted himself as to whether God could keep his promise or not. Oh yeah. Abram had been assured by God that one who was born of himself would be his heir. Yes, that was the assurance. Although at the moment he had no child, his heir would not be a mere servant, high and respected although that servant might be, no, but would be from his own bloodline. But then the issue of whether Sarai was too old surfaced. Both of them thought this, and after 10 years of Canaan, Sarai realized something had to be done about it. Unbelief, right? Something had to be done about it. She presented Abram her Egyptian maid Hagar for marriage. The result of unbelief. Ishmael was created. He was born out of that coming together as a result of this misguided attempt to help God. He was born in Abram's thinking as the heir of the promise, mind you, and most certainly grew up as Abram's son. Recall how Abraham later on told God, "Oh, that Ishmael should live before you." Genesis 17 verse 18. Because Abraham at that time did not know. He didn't realize what was the real issue. And it would be an heir from both him and his wife. So Abraham told God, "Oh, that Ishmael should live before you." The last verse of Genesis 16 tells us that Abraham was 86 years old when Ishmael was born. The first verse of the next chapter tells us that he was 99 years old when the Lord next appeared to him and then introduced himself as the God who is all sufficient. I am El who suffices. Walk before me and become flawless. So what then does this imply? For what cause is this happening? The response is found in the next few lines. God is now taking charge. That's a difference. Immediately. God is now taking charge. That means visibly charge. And will show Abram he is all sufficient in himself to maintain his purposes. Although that seems impossible to human sight. Please remember that this operation of God is told here from the relative viewpoint, of course, i.e., from Abram's 86 to 99 year of age, so 13 years long, for a period of 13 years, God seemed to be invisible in his life. Was God invisible? Of course not. God is everywhere and he's always active. So in the next few paragraphs, 7 times God tells Abram what he's doing or going to do. All that is needed of Abram, is that he should believe, nothing else. But we know, of course, that belief is also granted by God. It cannot be mustered up from inside of us, right? We know that. So Abram's name is henceforth to become Abraham. Abraham. So the He, the 5th letter in the Hebrew alphabet, was added into his name, and it became Abraham. For, says God, a father of a throng of nations have I appointed you. The all-sufficient God will make him productive beyond measure in line with this. Abram means exalted father. But Abraham, means exalted father of a throng. But God did then ask Abraham to do something somewhat unusual. He wanted him to circumcise himself and also insisted that all the male children of his progeny should be circumcised as well. That is odd, yes, if you hear about that for the first time. And this was the covenant even. Covenant God was creating with him. So, how might this covenant then be a sign? In what way may this odd custom confirm a covenant? Only in one sense. This is by indicating, like a sign, that the flesh could have nothing. The rejection, therefore, of some of the flesh represented the worthlessness of all flesh to attain everything God wanted. You see the point? So God achieved an Isaac, a son who was not subject to bondage at all, a son of a free woman. The flesh could only generate an Ishmael, a son necessarily subject to the bondage of the flesh. This difference is obviously significant. So, I'm going to leave it here and continue in the next video. So, think about these things. So, think about what circumcision means, because Paul also uses that word circumcision, spiritually speaking, in his epistles in Colossians. And there you see the real meaning underneath the surface of circumcision. So, thank you very much for watching and hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye.